It's good.
Yep, closer. Perfect. I believe that there exist certain mental blocks that stop space projects from being started. And how do you even start a space project? Well, you've heard it earlier today, thanks to Emily, but space is hard, obviously. And this has become a prolific saying for a good reason. I'm not going to contest it. But the space industry is absolutely not the exclusive domain of superpowers and billionaires. And getting started is much easier than you might actually think. Much cheaper as well. My main aim for today is to dispel a few misconceptions about the industry, hopefully inspire some of you to work or support on more space projects. From the very beginning, space has been in the hands of tinkerers and enthusiasts with significant constraints on budget, funding, equipment. Here are two of them in their sheds. On the left, we have Tsiolkovsky. He's a prominent figure in the philosophical movement of cosmism that some of you might be aware of. But he's also the father of the inventor of the infamous rocket equation. On the right is Goddard. He's the first person to ever build a liquid rocket engine, and he built it basically in his shed, in his workshop, in the US, and was chronically underfunded until after World War II. The Goddard Space Center, the NASA Goddard Space Center, is named after him, so he obviously achieved a lot and impacted a lot. Does anyone know who these people are? No? So these are actually JPL. JPL is an infamous story of how a bunch of students setting a fire in a dorm room turned into this iconic trailblazer of the space exploration that humanity has done. They're responsible for the Martian rovers, Curiosity, Perseverance, and they're planning missions to the surfaces of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Now, a critique I might hear from some of you is, but wait, all these efforts are, 20th century, a long time ago. They happened in the USA and the USSR. So I thought I'd bring a counterexample. So Magdrive are a pretty cool company. Magdrives are a British company that was founded in 2020. They're creating the next generation of spacecraft propulsion, and it uses magnetic fields to direct plasma into thrust. They launched the first hardware at space last year, and they're making a full flight thruster model this year. They started really scrappily. So in 2020, the first prototype was built in the bedroom of the CTO's 2-year-old daughter. It was the pandemic, so we can excuse them for that. But since then, they have iterated rapidly to make their novel technology. You can see from the slide, their prototypes. One after the other, they're named after Ian Banks, the Culture series. So yeah, reach out to them if you find that interesting. They're pretty cool guys. The email's right there. Now, you might be wondering why I'm delivering this talk. It's because I care about space, I care about starting projects, and I love thinking about the future. So hi, I'm Matvey. I've expressed this throughout my life through art, writing science fiction, but most importantly and most recently by pursuing engineering. I recently graduated from Imperial College London, and I did my thesis on improving astronaut dexterity. I decided that the current incremental improvements in space suit gloves were constrained by the compromise between dexterity and protection, so I decided to create a hydraulic exoskeleton instead that would transfer haptic and tactile feedback from the robotic end effector to the hand. The prototype cost me less than £150 and won me the Institution of Engineering and Technology Prize. It was scrappy. As a student, I also chaired the Space Society, growing it from around 60 members in 2019 to about 150 plus this past year. I've held space themed hackathons for the past 3 years, starting with Making for the Moon in 2021. Then that was online because of COVID, and then 2022, 2023 in-person ones, with the final Orion hack being held here this summer. The main aim of these hackathons was really similar to the aim of this talk, to show that you can just do stuff. With the rapid growth of the society during me being chair, I oversaw quite a few space projects start. And the most important takeaway from all of that was that the most important asset is people. No matter how much funding, hot air, and marketing you have, ensuring talent, passionate individuals are free to be inspired and productive is the key to a successful project. In my experience, flat but clear team structures achieve this best. And I really appreciate this when I look back on Project Svarog, and I think Philip is here somewhere, who was there with me, yeah. And I was a founding member of it in 2021. We sought to answer the question, what would it take for us, students at university, to put an object into interstellar space within a reasonable time frame? For that's roughly 20 years. We were inspired by the Oumuamua object, which flew past Earth around that, or slightly earlier than that. Within this project, my role is to lead and design, to lead the design and development of the cheap vacuum chamber test rig, which you can see on the right there, on the left there, on the right for you guys. That would be used to improve our solar cell simulation models. The effort led us to publish in the Journal of the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society with an all-undergrad author team. Since then, I've moved on from the project, but they've gone from victory to victory and have published at the International Symposium for Solar Sailing, and recently started working with the European Space Agency via the RexES-BexES initiative for testing solar cell deployment mechanisms. This past year, I did some systems engineering for this rover project. It's another Space Society project that started in October 2022. That's when we first organized the team. We were like, okay, we want to do this. By September 2023, so less than a year later, we were at the European Rover Challenge Finals as the only UK team to qualify, and we won best performance for one of the tasks. We were also the cheapest rover at the competition by an order of magnitude. So again, be scrappy. There are a few more projects at Space Society. There's probably too many for me to go through right now, but I'll mention the final one, Project Kepler. The project has been a long time in the works. To me, it exemplifies what finding the right people can do. The ambitions for Kepler are to break the world record for thrust-to-weight ratios for a liquid rocket engine. As you can see, it's pretty compact. It's quite small. And it's been 3 years in the making, from the initial project beginnings to us actually having hardware on the table. The current bottleneck is the expense of manufacturing. So obviously money is a problem. But as you can see, the engine and turbo machinery stack are slowly coming together and parts are getting made. A huge enabler of this project are modern materials, simulation tools, and manufacturing techniques, which weren't available not so long ago. These processes getting more and more accessible allows laymen, or students I guess, to be closer to space than ever, to achieve stuff that Soviet scientists could only dream of. And yeah, ultimately space is just a place. There are a growing number of technologies that can make space just a little more accessible, a little bit less hard than before. And with the development of the space economy, it is opening up interdisciplinary opportunities for space. Any field can be involved in what I call Space Plus. You choose your thing. It opens up new paradigms in so many fields. Overall, starting a space project, it's not brain surgery. The best way to get started, I heard a late laugh there. The best way to get started is to forget for a moment that space is hard, and that funding of the project is in the billions. Often we hear about how NASA's underfunded and its budget is huge. What I've learned from the project is that if you don't know anything, if you have no money, you can just get started and that will come along afterwards. You'll learn new things, and building something is the most important thing you can iterate from. And also, looking forward to the future, things are only going to get easier for you to start projects. The price to orbit has been steadily going down, and as Peter mentioned, it's going to go even further down with Starship and other new generation launches. And investment and funding is going up. So the government, VCs, they're seeing the opportunity in space. So if you want to do something new, you will find someone to give you money. And space will still remain hard. It's never going to be easy. So extreme distances, extreme environments will never totally be solved problems, but that's a good thing. And the difficulty of building in space is a feature and not a bug. The innovation that space technology gives is a result of the ingenuity that you need within the tough constraints that space has. Sam Altman also has a great blog post called Hard Startups, which I recommend you guys read. The essence of it boils down to the fact that successful companies rely on the dedication of brilliant people, and difficult and interesting problems keep brilliant people. So to tie things up together now, how do you start a space project? Well, firstly, be ambitious. Do something hard, do something that sounds crazy, and find a theoretical way to achieve it. Then prove that it could work. This will attract incredible people along the way, and they can join you on that journey. It's easiest to find good people, I guess, at events just like this, Twitter, your university society, whatever you want. And then make demos together, learn more from your failures. So if you want to spend your 500 out of your £1,000 budget on building a prototype that you don't know will work, do it. Someone will probably give you more money for a second one just because you tried. And yeah, after that you've got the hard part, which I guess every company and every project has to go through, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Melvin. John, you right? Great. While you are you plugging in? Yeah, great. So while you're plugged in and parked, I suppose. I don't know. I love the Space Plus analogy. If only there was some organisation that existed to bring people from space and other industries into the same room all at the same time. That's why we're here, in case you hadn't picked up on that, but cool. I'm not going to tell a joke or do a dance. Go on. Why did the Mars rover... No, okay. Starting in the middle, that's how we do space. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you, Joe, for inviting me along, chasing me up on LinkedIn. You're really lucky. I never check LinkedIn, so you were lucky you got in on that point. I'm an engineer with a company called Airbus Defence and Space. So standing up and talking to people is not my thing, so it's quite scary to look at and see all those faces, but hopefully I'll drop into talking nerdy stuff about what I do, and that will make me feel much more comfortable. So I've titled my talk, Why I Built a Mars Rover on My Mother-in-Law's Dining Room Table. Yes, it happened. Some of it was in the shed, but most of it was on my mother-in-law's dining room table. So if you want, you can get your phones out, you can find me on X, Twitter. I'm at John Chinner, and the rover itself has got an account at Yuri3 Rover. So you want to go and look us up on there, you can find us out. You can follow our adventures, and you can look back into the past and see all the things we've been doing. So to flip back to the why, 2015 and 16, that's me, slightly less hairy, I think slightly more fat, I'm not sure. This is Bridget. This is a prototype for the ExoMars rover, so European Space Agency's rover to go look for signs of life on Mars. This is Bridget, a low-fidelity traction model, so basically six-wheeled rover, not very clever, not very smart, but a way you can test stuff. And I'm quite lucky I get to take Bridget out to the public. This is Paolo Nespoli, the Italian ESA astronaut. I'm telling you all about it. He looks thrilled. But he's a human spaceflight guy, right? And this is Bruno. So this is the full-size prototype ExoMars rover owned by the European Space Agency. But because we built the main rover, we also built a spare. It's not a flight rover, but it's very, very similar. Owned by the European Space Agency, but they let us take it out to public events, which is great. I'm a Bruno driver. I can take this thing out and drive it around in public. It's quite cool. But going back to this event here, this is stargazing live at Leicester when there was a partial eclipse some time ago. Bridget didn't come out of the van, right? And the BBC turned up and went, "Can we film you bringing this Mars rover out of the van?" And I went, yeah, of course. Bring it. They brought the cameras over and they were all like, "Right, we're set up, ready for this." And I went, "Right, Bridget, on the controller, back." Didn't work. And the BBC are like, "But you're a high-tech company, this thing should work." And I'm like, "It's not working, go away." So didn't go very well. And driving home from that event with Mars rover in the van, taking it back to Stevenage, I just thought to myself, we can do better than this. Taking out the real hardware that's being used for this mission is maybe not the best thing to do. So I build stuff, I'm a tinkerer, got a shed full of tools, I've got Raspberry Pis, I've sent them to space. Maybe I can build a robot, it'll give me something to do, it'll give something to focus on. So I'll build my own Mars rover, right? And I can take it out to schools and events. It's never going to go to Mars, take it out to schools and events. They can see what looks like a Mars rover, but we don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of taking one of these things along. So all the stuff in my rover was to make it look like a real Mars rover. It's got 6 wheels, 6-wheel drive, solar panels, thermal blanket, 2 cameras, all the stuff so you can talk to young people and the public about a Mars rover without having to take a whole big thing along with you. So that's why I built the rover. And just going back through the process of it, so bits and bobs on the table, like I said before, just build something. Go out there and build stuff. Get some bits, bolt it together, see how it goes. I had to commit to buying all of the chassis, all the motors, all the steering, all that stuff before I knew it was even going to work. And it was about 1,200 quid for all the bits and bobs to go in there. But I didn't know it was going to work. It was going to drive too fast, too slow. Just got to go and do it. So there you go. Chassis, 6063 aluminium, flight aluminium. So it didn't have to be, but it had to look like a Mars rover. This picture down here, I snuck into the Mars yard. There's Bruno again. I snuck into the Mars yard one night when the engineers had gone home and drove my rover in its prototype state all around the Mars yard in Stevenage and left a set of tracks around. And I'm sure they came in the next morning and wondered what the hell was going on with these tracks that weren't their rover. I never told them. I took a picture. I never told them. I figured they probably know it was me. And this is actually my mother-in-law's dining room table. Okay, so my wife and I sold our house. We moved in with the in-laws. I had a load of time. I had no house to maintain, so I just cracked on building this rover on the mother-in-law's dining room table. Balanced on 4 tins of tomatoes. And my willing apprentice there, my daughter, she's now 10 and wants to come and work with me. So it's already starting to work, right? She wants to come and be an engineer. And there she is helping me out get this thing going. I guess that was the whole point of this, was to inspire young people to want to join engineering and science and all those things. That's my journey. I am an ex-apprentice, finished my apprenticeship 2001. Oh, no, not even 2001. It's a long time ago, isn't it? It's quite scary. So I didn't go to university. I'm an ex-apprentice. So I'm kind of a big fan of that kind of vocational route, degree apprenticeships, things like that. So not all young people are aspiring to work in space thinking they have to have a PhD. Actually, there are other careers and things for them to do out there that they can come along and join us, and they don't have to be A-star students like me. Really happy to get the rover featured in the Magpie magazine. This is the Raspberry Pi magazine. It was featured in there. That was the nerdy high point for me, being in the magazine. And there's a few more pictures. I built this thing to go and do this, and I just had to go do it, and everybody engaged with it so well. The point was that the ExoMars rover, the real one, was due to launch in 2018, then 2020, then 2022. It's still on Earth, hasn't gone yet. It'll go eventually. There was some excitement around Tim Peake when Tim Peake came back from space. The next really interesting British thing to go to space was going to be the ExoMars rover, still on Earth. So we've got all this outreach opportunity. But here we go. So I've been out and about all over the place, just trying to, all girls, amazing. Still only 17% girls in the engineering workforce in Airbus Defence and Space. So clearly something's not quite right, but got to get out there in front of people and tell them about the ExoMars rover and get even the parents, right? Because these kids are going to go away, and that parent is going to have to help them out, right? They're going to have to nurture them and maintain them and keep them on that pathway when I'm not around. So really talking to the parents is quite important as well. I love going to schools, and I've got some anecdotes to tell you about the school trips I do because they really, really engage me. I wanted to take a rover, talk about a Mars rover, and what we ended up learning was about team working, communication, all those sort of things. So I take the rover to a school, I show them about the rover, we talk about why we send robots to Mars, and then we drop into a workshop where I put the rover in a hall or in a classroom, and I set it up to be remotely driven on a laptop. There is a camera on the front and it streams back to a screen, and I set one team up of school kids. This is like 8, 9, 10, even 15-year-olds. One team are looking at the video, streaming live from the rover via Wi-Fi, and the other team are looking at a console, a drag and drop, a bit like Scratch, where they drag and drop commands to the rover. So they can drive forward, and they type in 10 centimeters. Drag in, turn left, 90 degrees. And then when they've done all the commands, I don't think anybody in this room is old enough to remember Big Track, apart from me, to be honest. So a bit like Big Track, you put all your commands and you hit go, and it executes the commands. And I hide, I've got a little Groot bobblehead. I hide in the room somewhere and say to them, go find it. They go, what do we do? I go, oh, you're on this mission now. So the scientists can see the video, the drivers can't. So the scientists have to look at the video from the rover and decide what they want to do. And then they have to tell the rover drivers what they want to do with the rovers. They're not doing any science, they're just communicating. They're working as a team, right? They're going to go, I want the rover to drive forward 10 centimeters. And then the driving team have to go, right, type in, drive forward 10 centimeters, go. They don't see anything, they just sent the command to the rover, right? And the science team have to go, oh yeah, it's moving. Oh, now we have to move a little bit to the left. And what does a little bit to the left mean? Turn left 30, 40 degrees? And they're like, okay, type in. Do you mean 30 or 40? So it builds this whole team-working communication scenario with young people, which is a complete bonus on top of what I was expecting to do with it. It's great to see young people engaging with this, because once I've started to do this and I saw how it would work, I'd start having some fun, right? I was saying to Joe earlier, there's some ultrasonic sensors on the front of there that would detect a wall in front, and it would stop the rover bumping into stuff. And I thought, actually, I quite like the idea of taking the intelligence out of the rover and put it into the student. So now I coded it out. So now the students have to look in front of them and go, right, there's a wall there, I'm not going to drive into it. Rather than the rover is going to stop itself driving into that wall, the intelligence in that system is in the student rather than in the robot. And it's great fun to see because right at the start, my code was terrible, right? I'm a hardware engineer, my code was terrible. And I couldn't get it to turn less than 30 degrees. So any number you put in had to be, if you put in below 30 degrees, nothing happened. And I'm thinking it's because my code's terrible. But I said to them, well, what are you going to do about it? And they just work it out amongst themselves. They go, well, okay, if I want to turn 10 degrees to the left, how about I turn 350 degrees to the right? That will get me back to the same place. Now, this is like 9, 10-year-olds, and I'm not guiding them, not helping them. I just let them get on with it, and they work that out for themselves. And I sit in the back going, oh my God, that's amazing. And I see the teachers going, oh my God, that's amazing. And we're like playing it cool, like, yeah, you're all right, kids. I suppose you're okay. But it's amazing. That was never anything I anticipated ever seeing when I built this rover to take it into schools. It's really, really cool to see kids communicating. Quiet kids, the little nerdy ones sitting there going, oh, I think there's something happening over there. Getting a voice. And they go, right, okay, what's going on here? So big, loud team leaders in these groups. One scenario I had, right, they'd been driving this rover around for about 3 hours and they were getting really good at it. I was at a school in Farnborough and I closed the curtains in the room so it made it really dark. So it was challenging them a bit further. Put some bricks on the floor and they had to drive around the bricks to try and find the groups. So they drove the rover up because I'd been hiding Groot behind the bricks. They knew I was hiding Groot behind the bricks. They drove up to a brick and they went, right, definitely behind that brick. And there was this quiet child there who was just like, I don't think it is. And the team were like, yeah, it's definitely behind there because that's where he's hiding this Groot. And he went, I don't think it is. And I said to him, why do you think it's not behind that brick? And he said to me, I think it's not behind that brick because there's a sunlight coming in the window over there. This is like a 10-year-old, right? There's sunlight coming in the window over there. The brick is casting a shadow over there. And if your little Groot was behind that brick, Groot would be casting a shadow and we'd be able to see the shadow. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's so cool. Have you told your teammates? And he went, I've tried to tell them, but they won't listen to me. And I'm like, well, they'll have to find out. So they then have to drive the rover around the brick. And they go around and go, oh, it's not there. And he goes, well, I tried to tell you. And I'm just thinking, that's amazing to see that logic in that young person's head. And to see them working that out for themselves. It is so cool. I mean, you know, as you can tell, it makes me feel really, really energized when I go back to the office. So the evolution of this thing really is... the pandemic came around, I couldn't go and take it to schools. I'm thinking, well, I've got a Mars rover, what am I going to do with this thing? So I got it to be drivable online. So you didn't have to be in the same room as it, or in the same school as it, over Wi-Fi. I put it online. And you can see here, this is the script, the GUI for the driving it. So you drop these commands in, hit send, and the rover moves around. The more you move, you lose your battery power. And also, if you don't open the solar panels, you lose your battery power quicker. So they've got to work out that for themselves. Found some sign of life. Not intelligent at all, my dog. But this was cool to see it go online. And you can see, I offered this up to the Airbus Defence and Space people to say, look, you know, if you want to get your child online with my rover, let me know and we'll set it up. And this is one of my colleagues' son, realising from Cambridge he could drive a rover in Hampshire himself, and it was all on him. He's like, oh, I can do this. That's the face. And the parent caught that face. And I'm like, that's so cool. Look at that face. I mean, that's almost like the way I feel on the inside, but I don't ever do that. So we've had lots of adventures out and about, and I think for me the ultimate thing is that this became something much more than I ever anticipated it being. And you know, if you don't take that chance to do something, you're never going to find out what that bonus was, what that extra thing was going to be, unless you go and do it, right? So that would be my advice: is go and do it, fulfill your ideas. If you can think it, you can do it, right? That's the thing. If you can dream it, go do it. And one final little nerdy thing here, that's the actual flight ExoMars rover in Stevenage in the clean room right there. And this was just the day before it was due to be shipped off to be launched. And there's a meeting with my nerdy, look, it's a selfie with a Mars rover. It's still there, it hasn't gone yet. That was 4 years ago. I mean, it'll go one day. One day you'll see ExoMars on a rocket being launched to Mars. And you'll go, I remember some guy 10 years ago talking about that.
It's a mass problem.
It is a mass problem, absolutely. So there you go, that's it, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nathan, can you come plug in? Awesome. In the meantime, who here has got a degree, who's gone to university? Yeah, most people. So we are similar in that neither of us have been to university. Yeah, sure. I'm not doing a hard thing, but doing other hard things instead. But, I haven't built one of those yet, so that's on the list. But I think has anyone been to the futurelondon.org website? Not on a phone, but on a laptop. Because the big thing at the top of the website, there's a USB-C if you need it, Nathan. The big thing at the top of the website, I think, probably sort of aligns very well with the last two talks we've had. It says, just fucking build something. Right?
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah.
Go on. You know what to do. Yeah. Okay, 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Okay. Nathan.
Hi all. Sorry, my voice is a bit... I'm going to sing a song. No. This is how I always sound. Welcome to an evening of late night space jazz. So I run a polling application called Viewpoints, and I think it's nice to finish an evening like this just figuring out what we all think about things. So if you follow this link, then it'll take you to like a swipey Twitter-style poll, where you can, a Tinder-style poll. So you can swipe right to agree, swipe left to disagree. You can add your own thoughts as well. And it would just be good to see what the room thinks about this kind of stuff. Do you want to see more satellites? Maybe you don't. Whatever you've taken from this, you can just add it as your own little thought, and then we're going to just look and we're going to reflect to the room what you all think. So I'll give you 2 minutes just to do that. So you just grab them with your finger and you just flick them to the left or to the right, like this.
Or click the emojis.
Or click the emojis, yeah. You got agree, disagree, don't know, and like bad question. If you just hate me. Oh yeah, sure. So that's a great point for me.
So we are actually going to get the space jet. Get from Anthony, yeah.
I don't know why they don't pay me. Okay, right. So we nearly done. Hands up if you've done it. Oh, great. Okay, that's enough for some. That's a representative sample. I did statistics, but I didn't like it, so I'm not really sure what representative sample means. Okay, that's not the page. I will in a sec. Results. Great. Okay. So someone's put it's time to build. We love to see that. Yeah, I know. Okay. So the nice thing about this is it allows us to find the most consensus and the most conflict and the most confusion. You can look on your phones as well, but we'll just go through them quickly. So it's time to build. Everyone agrees. I'm excited about the future. I'm glad to hear it. I'd like the UK to have a launch space. Well, we saw that Peter had his a link to his whatever that thing you send to the government is called, petition. So you can sign that. I can't remember words. We watched Rocket Launch Live. That's right, Joe. I've run my own secret suggestion for an event that you didn't talk about, but we could do a rocket launch watch.
Let's do it. Let's launch a rocket.
I mean, I was just like, great, yeah, we're going to build a rocket. We're going to build a rocket as a group. That's what I meant. Okay, most conflict. I'm looking for a co-founder. So some people are, some people aren't. We should mine the moon.
Raise your hand if you're looking for a co-founder.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we'll do that. Who's looking for a co-founder? Some of you, it was anonymous. Some of you didn't say it. Okay, well, close your eyes, then raise your hands. No, I don't know. We'll come up with some way of doing it. We'll do like a matchmaking for co-founders. See, it's so easy. I don't have to run the events. We should mine the moon. Some people disagree. Some people unsure. So we've got some more discussions there. I'm concerned about collisions. This is the thing I always think. Is collisions? I mean, space is very big. Things are very far apart. Are collisions a big problem? I don't know. I haven't done the maths. I care about sustainability. Some people do. a lot of people concerned about what it means. So that's, someone could do a talk on what sustainability in space really means. We had Emily talk about that for a bit, but we could have more on it. Okay, and we could just do some confusion where people were confused. These sorts of questions. People didn't really know what they meant. So, speakers, here's some response from the audience about things they didn't understand, which maybe is useful to you. Anyway, you can read more. Hopefully that was enjoyable. I'd love to run this at more events. I think it's just a fun thing to do, to reflect to a room what you think maybe you didn't know. I'm Nathan Young, Nathan PM Young on Twitter. Thanks again to you all for coming.
Thank you, Nathan. We're going to wrap up with David. David, I've been told that David is going to say some controversial things, so we shall see.
Perhaps.
That is not all you mean.
Well, thank you very much. I'm slightly different from many of the speakers before, although I did start off as a space cadet, and I'm almost an example of how you can take your skills into another field and still stay in close contact with space and the future and the inspiration and everything that brings. But I've always been interested in space. And I did my PhD at Jodrell Bank. I was, for my sins, the only PhD student that Professor Sir Bernard Lovell had. And there was probably a reason for that, because he taught me no astronomy. He was always playing cricket, and he taught me a lot about Elgar. Apart from that, he left the astronomy completely up to you to get on with. But it was a cunning plan by the government that got me into the communication business whilst I was a space cadet. The Science Research Council, as it was then, gave me a grant. Oh, great, a grant to be an astronomer. I had never thought I could be an astronomer, but they gave me a grant. Problem was, I needed to eat and I needed to live, and the grant wasn't enough to cover my rent. I still want to be an astronomer, what do I do? So you've got to find an alternative source of income. That came in several forms. I used to play my guitar at a Spanish restaurant with strict instructions not to open my mouth. I also wrote for magazines like New Scientist. But then I met a guy who was a DJ at Piccadilly Radio. Now, Piccadilly Radio at the time in Manchester was a big thing. And he said, well, we have a problem called needle time. I said, what's that? You mean when people phone up, you give them grief? He said, no. Needle time is we're only allowed to play records for so many hours a day. So at night, we don't want to play records because we want to save them up for drive time. We want people to talk. And I said, I'll talk. So we had an audition with Tim Grundy at the time, who was, you probably too young to remember this, but Bill Grundy was his dad, and he had the famous confrontation with the Sex Pistols. It's all online, and it's great fun. Anyway, so we did this for a few weeks, and I thought, well, the whole point of this is to earn some money in order to carry on being astronomy. So I went to see the boss of Piccadilly Radio, and I learned how to negotiate. I said, look, he said, yeah, I've heard of you. It's very good, yeah, carry on. I said, but I should be paid. He said, yeah, you should be paid. How much? There's the killer. How do you pitch it? Do you pitch it high? Do you pitch it low? So I came up with a middle figure. And he said, yeah, that's fine. I thought, damn. I could have gone much higher. So anyway, I learned how to broadcast in the middle of the night with DJs that then went on to become famous, and then one went on to work for the Beeb and Top of the Pops. But I learned microphone, studio. I learned not to freeze in front of a microphone. Then I went down, having been at Jodrell Bank. My work at Jodrell Bank was using the big telescope. I don't care what anybody says, the big telescope on the Cheshire Plain is still the most futuristic site in the country. It's magnificent. We used to coordinate the observations with this radio telescope with satellites, space observatories, and ground-based optical observatories. Now, you wouldn't believe how complicated it is to get everybody looking at the same object at the same time. You know, we'd have telescopes all around the world in orbit, and we're looking at the same object. And then when you get the data together at the end, you find actually we were only all looking at the same object at the same time for 3 minutes. And we had great fun with that. But then I went to the Space Science Laboratory of University College London, which was great fun because it was in the 80s. Now, the 80s was a time, like now, of great optimism for the British space effort. In fact, there are a great many similarities between then and now, both good and bad. And it was the time when the space shuttle was flying for the first time. Ariane was flying for the first time. We had missions to the Comet. And I got involved with hands-on hardware. I was involved with missions to send equipment to Halley's Comet, space observatories, observing in the infrared and the X-ray beam, and also on the space shuttle, involved with space shuttle payloads on 3 space shuttle missions, which was great fun, working alongside astronauts. They were the same age as me when we were working alongside, and in subsequent years, used to get phone calls or emails. Say, "Hi Dave, how are you? I've just been selected to fly on the space shuttle next week." And you say, yeah, great, yeah, thanks, good for you, you know. I mean, being a Brit, I was totally excluded from doing anything like that because Britain at the time was not into astronauts. We hadn't signed up to the European astronaut program. You could fly if you were Dutch or German, as indeed they did on Space Lab 1, but not if you were a Brit. You had to become an American citizen. There was no way I was going to go and live in America when my kids were growing up. So that was great fun, being involved with real space hardware on space shuttle flights. It had its downside at times because, the pilot on Space Lab 1 was Brewster, who died on the Challenger accident. In fact, most of the people who died on the Challenger accident were friends of mine, so it brought it home. But it was a very exciting time for British space. And I was part of a group of people who were saying to the government, we've got to do this in a bit more of an organised way because the administration, the funding was chaotic. And there were no jobs, there was hardly any money for anything. And if you wanted a career in space and you didn't have a sideline earning money in the media, it was very difficult. So eventually, I remember berating Michael Heseltine about this. And he said, yeah, we've got to do something. They did something. And it wasn't very good. They didn't, instead of having a space agency, which is what we wanted, they had a National Space Centre, which was a government fudge where you had 30 civil servants on rotation from other departments who had an interest in space, who had their own money. The Space Centre didn't have its own money. They had their own departmental money. And they turned up once in a while in order to not spend any money, not give any money to anybody else, save face, and then go home having protected their own patch. And it was complete nonsense. But the government made a fatal mistake in this respect that they wanted a figurehead for this. So they asked Roy Gibson, who was the first Director General of the European Space Agency, a very big guy. And he came in and he wrote the British Space Plan, which you can see it online and compare it to the British Space Plan that came out, I think, 2 years ago from the UK Space Agency. But the first chapter wasn't published. And this was about why should we do space in this country? There's new orbits, there's new technologies, there's new opportunities. Ariane is flying, the space shuttle is doing new things. Each mission, there's talk about going back to the moon. The Russians are still flying their space stations. People are getting into space in a new way. Perhaps America will decide to go back to the moon and go on to Mars. It was a time of great enthusiasm. But the government decided to do nothing, and Roy Gibson resigned in a great burst of publicity. And then the directors of the National Space Centre were career civil servants who really there were to place time and serve a few years before they retired. And indeed, if you look back, and people have done analysis of the 80s, the early 90s, it is a dead zone for British space. There were no jobs. I think in the whole of the 80s, there were only 2 jobs. So I look at the scene as it is now with so many jobs, and actually a skill shortage of engineers in Britain, in this country, in the space sector, a severe shortage of personnel. And you think how different it was then. But one could argue, and this is another talk, that the coordination we have got in this country is not as many people would like it to be, even though we have a space agency. And that with all these great ideas we've seen tonight, hopefully we will find a way to exploit them. But over the past few years, it's been difficult with the skill shortages. It's been extremely difficult with the visas. There are European astronomers space scientists, astronomers, who've gone back to their own country. There are people Brits who've gone to abroad because of the visa problems. France and Germany, their space agencies love this. Add to that a lack of money, and the fact that France and Germany spend a lot more of their own money on their own space program, as well as their contribution to the European Space Agency, means that we are probably third, and we're going to slip to fourth. It's also bad in UK astronomy. UK astronomy is facing a decade of dire consequences and the space science component of UK astronomy is facing a hard time because of the flat cash funding for the last 10 years. And also that continuation for this year means that it's going to be a very difficult thing to do with the fact there's no money around. Anyway, this was the 1980s. We had great fun, we had great ambition for the future, but the government really didn't follow through. Mind you, there were great plans and great failures. Britain, with its two major companies then, British Aerospace and Matra Marconi Space, made some disastrous decisions. Marconi Aerospace chose entirely the wrong technology for satellite communications. British Aerospace wanted to go back to the moon and started building moon bases, which was completely unrealistic given the time. And that led to their mergers and acquisitions that led to the conglomeration of space companies that we see these days. So if you wanted to get on, if you limped along in this country as best you could, or you went to work in France, Germany, or the United States. Wherever you go in this world, particularly then, especially now, every space agency you go to, be it India, Japan, Middle East countries, America, any NASA institution, you will find Brits. You will find lots and lots of Brits. We have a space program in that respect all over the world, and we are essential to other people's success. But I sort of left the space program in the sense, although when I left UCL, I did work for NASA. I see a couple of NASA T-shirts around. My wife was joking the other day that she saw online you could buy a distressed NASA T-shirt, which looked as though it was old. And I said, actually, my NASA T-shirts are pre-distressed. They are very old indeed. You don't need to buy them distressed. Perhaps I should have worn one tonight. But anyway, I then went to work in the media because I was a space scientist who could write for newspapers and who appeared on the BBC. A chap called John Burt was a weird chap. Decided that instead of giving a journalist who last year covered local government, the year before that was following Princess Di around and saying, do science. He'd actually take a scientist who had some interest in the media and say, come and be a journalist. And I did the obvious thing and said no. He came back 6 months later and asked me again. And I'd learned from my failed negotiations with Piccadilly Radio, if they come back 6 months later and ask you again, you're in a better position. And I eventually said yes. The first day I was there, thinking about, it's my job to put science on the news. A young lady came to see me who was a producer, and she was dressed all in black, as they often are. And she said, we want to do something, I think it was about power lines. Power lines cause cancer. And I said, wait a minute, you can't say that, look at the evidence. You've got to do the science, except in some certain circumstances, it's not the case. She looked at me and said, David, I know that's what science says, but we want to go beyond science and get at the real truth. And I thought, this is going to be a very interesting place to work. But it's my job to put science on the radio and on the television. And that was great fun because BBC opens doors. So I got a chance to actually go to places that I couldn't have done as a scientist and talk about science and talk to interesting people about interesting things, go to launches and all that type of business, because the job opened people's doors. And I already knew a lot of astronauts, but I knew most of them, over those years. It was great fun. I remember almost getting stopped by the police for speeding when I had to get an astronaut called John Young from one side of London to the other for a function. And policeman stopped us, and then he comes down and says, "Do you know you were speeding, sir?" And he said, "Tell him I walked on the moon." I said, "I can't tell a British policeman that you walked on the moon, because he'll think I'm taking the mick, and I'll be down the police station before you can say, you know, one small step." So we had great fun with that. But there were times when it was hilarious. I remember when we had the 100th anniversary of the Electron, and somebody phoned me up and said, "From Breakfast News." I said, "We want to do a piece on the 100th anniversary of the Electron." All right, you know, it was discovered by, was it Röntgen in the late 1800s. She said, "Well, do you think anybody in any laboratory or museum or institution actually kept the original Electron that was found 100 years ago?" I said, "Yeah, actually they did. I've got a piece of amber here, and it's in there." And if I'd have given that to her, it would have been on air the following morning, and I'd have been in trouble. But it was great fun, but we got to deal with a great deal of interesting space missions. And a lot of people, in fact, a lot of people who went into the space business used to get in contact and say, "I went into the space business because of the broadcasts you did." We had interesting projects, of which, well, Challenger was one. Challenger was before I started to work for the BBC, but I started to work as Challenger as the shuttle returned to flight. We had Project Juno. Do you remember Project Juno? Britain's first astronaut. This was a hilarious thing. It was a competition to be Britain's first astronaut. You had to apply, and you had a fair series of medical tests and then psychological tests, and then you were whittled down to the final 3 or 4, and then you were taken to Moscow to be put in a centrifuge, test, all that business, and then one was to be chosen. The trouble is they ran out of money very quickly. In fact, it was a scam. The people disappeared with the money very quickly that had been raised. But my editor actually came up to me and he said, "David," he said, "you're going to apply." And I said, "What?" He said, "You're going to apply to become Britain's first astronaut." I said, "Honestly?" He said, "Yes. Just imagine what that would mean for the BBC. Our astronauts up there, nation shall speak peace unto nation, you know, round the world. You get in there, you know, apply." So I had to apply. And I got reasonably way through the process, although the selection criteria was absolutely awful and amateurish. But then ITN wanted to cover the mission, and they offered, although they didn't pay up in the end, £250,000 to the Juno project people if they could have exclusive access to the training, to the facilities and all that business of the astronaut as they were being trained to go into space. It did not go down well if there was a slightest prospect of ITN following a BBC correspondent through this process. So I was very quickly ignominiously ejected from the programme, which is probably just as well. I wouldn't have got very far. But Helen Sharman got the gig, and then they ran out of money. They didn't have sponsorship. There was a parallel with the sponsorship to the Beagle project going to Mars, which perhaps I'll get onto shortly. I'm trying to sort of say that there was great passion, there was great enthusiasm, just as there is now about space, and people wanted careers, and if you wanted to be a space person, nothing would put you off. Eventually, we ran out of money, they ran out of money, and it was really, well, Gorbachev said that he would fly Helen Sharman if Margaret Thatcher didn't have cruise missiles based on British soil. That wasn't going to happen. Eventually he gave up and they flew her for free. It's not particularly good for Helen's career, because when she came back, she wanted to run something, didn't run something. So it didn't actually do a person's long-term career good to be the first Briton in space, but she was in for the record books. And that was an interesting time. We had a great time broadcasting for the BBC and doing that, and we have a lot of people in the space business who said that they went into the space business, have had their enthusiasm because of the stuff we did. And for many years we slayed ITN. ITN in the 80s slayed the BBC when it came to space business because they had a really good guy called Frank Miles. They broke the Hotel story which was an air-breathing horizontal takeoff rocket that was supposed to revolutionize space access. Well, it was really nothing of the sort. But they broke it, and it played to the cliche of eccentric, brilliant British inventor at his breakfast table with his Sinclair Spectrum ZS81 beats NASA at his own game. It's a similar trope that happens in all various fields. But they did really well. We beat them in the 90s, I like to think. We also had the Project Beagle, which was Colin Pillinger's idea to land a British space probe on Mars. Now, this is something I really enjoyed covering, because Colin wanted to be a star. He wanted to be the focus of this mission. He wanted to raise money. I remember we had a conversation with him once and said, Colin, how are you going to raise money? He said, sponsorship. Everybody will want to be part of this mission. And this is a lesson for media and communication and raising sponsorship that it still applies today. He said, people have beaten their way to my door for this. Nobody came. We once had a discussion with him saying, Colin, it's not working. What are you going to do? Are you going to get sponsored by Kellogg's or Mars Bars? And he said, no, we wouldn't be so tacky as to be sponsored by Mars Bars. Anyway, it cost the government 45 million quid when they had to be bailed out. And the project didn't work anyway. Got to Mars, failed. And then he had the audacity to phone us up saying it was an operational success because it actually got to Mars. The fact he didn't send any data back is probably, a minor point that he didn't. So it's great fun. But I left the BBC eventually, because if you work for the BBC, eventually it drives you mad. And you've got to do something else. And I wrote a book when I was at the BBC called The Moon, the Biography, which was a great idea, great book. And then I loved that so much, I wrote the Sun biography, and then I wrote a biography of Galileo, which I did for the money. And then I wrote books about astronauts. It was 150 years since Journey to the Centre of the Earth was published by Jules Verne, so I wrote a scientific version of that. And then my agent phoned me up in 2018 saying, next year's the 50th anniversary of the Apollo mission, are you going to write a book about Apollo? And I said, no, the problem is I know 10 people who are writing books about Apollo. And if you're an author, 1/10 of the sales is no good. She said, none of them have met all the astronauts. None of them know all the astronauts. Get your phone book out, write the book. I did it, and it became the book of the anniversary. And then they wanted a sequel. And this touches in with some of the things that were said earlier. How do you write a sequel to Apollo 11? Well, you change the date, and you add 100 years to it, to 2069 instead of 1969. And then you go into all these technical details about how you would fly to Mars, the radiation, the problems, the crew, the design of the spacecraft, the rotating spacecraft. I had great fun putting all that into a narrative and also writing fiction inside the book as to actually what would happen during the mission. So that was great fun. And then the final book was, current book is a book about aliens and life in space. And if anybody phones me up again, asking me to talk about unidentified anomalous phenomena and the American government cover-up, that they're obviously covering up crashed spacecraft, secret space program, aliens in freezers, I'm going to scream unless they pay me some money. Because, it's total and utter nonsense, but it's indicative of, if you like, a want to believe. There's communities out there who want to believe in space. They want to believe in the future, be they the future of colonizing the moon and going on to Mars in the 2040s, or be they that we've already done it and there are secrets that aliens can teach us. The passion and the enthusiasm for space is constant. And with the internet and with communications and social media, that passion is never been as great. And in this country, we have a unique position because, as I've said, our engineers and scientists fertilize the world with our activity, our ideas, and our efforts. And we could do more to keep more of them at home and fertilize our own space program. But that means the government has to spend more money. France and Germany do this. If only we were like France and Germany. when I was young, when I was your age, I berated Heseltine and Thatcher about this. Perhaps you ought to try and do the same. There's a story I'll leave you with about Maggie Thatcher and about the problems the British space programme had in the late 80s. And she used to tell this with glee. I don't understand why. Well, I do really. It was the night of the Giotto encounter with Halley's Comet. It was a Thursday night. The BBC decided to have a mega spectacular with Patrick Moore at Darmstadt, with the scientists where the action was going to happen, and James Burke in the octagon room of the Royal Greenwich Observatory with a select panel of scientists, including the Astronomer Royal. I was on telly that night. I was on Newsnight, opposite Peter Snow, and we did a better job. But what happened is that they lost contact with Giotto just as it was going into the dust cloud, and the picture went fuzzy and disappeared. Now, they hadn't worked out a plan as to what to do if you got no picture. And you can still see this on YouTube. The programme fell apart spectacularly. Patrick didn't know what to say. James Burke didn't know what to say, didn't know who to go to, etc. It was magnificently bad. Maggie was watching. And the rumour is, and she said, she used to boast about this later. She said, well, is that the best they can do? Wait till they ask for some more money. And she, for many years, she was, space business, it's waste of money. It took her a long time to actually persuade her and a successor that it wasn't. So I've moved from being a space cadet to being in the media, and I've never regretted it. It's been great. Had there been the employment opportunities then as they are now, I may not have made that transition. But it goes to show that you can have other careers if you go into space. Last week at the House of Commons at the Select Committee, the Astronomer Royal said most people who go into space, go into postdocs, we don't expect them in space or astronomy to actually become space scientists or astronomers. They go into other fields. So it's a great grounding for other things, but you can still keep your passion and you can still influence people about how wonderful and exciting the future is. The future gets, particularly Artemis going back to the moon, gets more difficult by the day. But we will get there. It's often said, and I'll leave you with this, that whatever happens with Elon Musk and his Starship, and in another black book, I've got the phone number of Elon Musk's secretary. Not this one, not this one. Actually, I'll tell you a story. I was at the BBC, 1 minute, I was at the BBC and somebody phoned me up saying there's a tech entrepreneur wanting to organise a dinner for certain people. Would you like to come along? And I said, no, I can't do it this week. I'm doing this on the Tuesday. I'm sorry, I can't do it. And she said, oh, no, never mind. Who is he? I said, Bill Gates. Didn't make that mistake twice. So it's been great, rubbing shoulders with astronauts and people, doing stories about them. Still keeping a hand in with the space business. And it's an exciting time for the future. So just like being a writer, which I regard myself at the moment, if you're into space, don't let anything put you off. If you want to be in space, you will find a way. At whatever level, no matter what the level of employment is in the industry, no matter perhaps which country you have to go to, if you really want to stay in space and be part of an exciting future, back to the moon, onto Mars, then you can. And the final thought is, if we do go back to if we go to Mars in the 2040s, which is the current plan, although I expect it will slip, and in my book it does slip, that means that the first person to walk on Mars is at school. They don't know who they are, but they're at school, interested in space and dinosaurs. Perhaps one of you lot. You never know.
Thank you so much, David. Okay. You called out a couple of themes there. It's almost like one of the themes is coordination problem, getting a bunch of interesting people in the same WhatsApp group. Scan the QR code. This is for this event. So if you're interested in space and other Space Plus, join that WhatsApp group. The other problem you called out, David, is government, which just so happens to be the next event we're running. So, why is government broken? Scan the QR code to find out. Actually, scan the QR code and wait 3 weeks and then find out. We're going to learn about civil service, how we reform the civil service, what reform is needed, and how we can make the government more pro-future. Okay, that's it. I think there's some pizza, particularly for those that didn't get any food in the first break. Go and get pizza first. One of them's vegan. The vegans know which one the vegan one is. If you're not sure, it's not your pizza. So, okay, thank you very much for coming. Ask any questions. See you all soon.